The sound of drums rolled across the Valley of Mexico like thunder, a deep heartbeat that seemed to shake the ground itself. In the great city of Tenochtitlán, thousands of men, women, and children gathered at the base of the towering Templo Maya, their eyes lifted toward the twin shrines that crowned the pyramid. Smoke from burning copal incense drifted into the air, carrying with it the heavy fragrance of sanctity and expectation. For the Aztecs, this was not merely a day of spectacle, it was survival itself. The people believed their world had been born from sacrifice, and that only through constant offerings of blood and life could the gods continue to hold back the darkness that threatened to consume creation. The myths were clear in every child's mind. In the time before time, the gods had gathered at Tenochtitlán, debating who among them would give their life to reignite the sun. Without such a sacrifice, the heavens would remain dark, and the earth would wither. Two gods stepped forward, one noble and powerful, the other poor and afflicted with sores. The wealthy god faltered at the final moment, while the sickly deity leapt into the flames, becoming the sun. Yet even as the sky blazed with new light, the sun refused to move until the other gods offered their own blood. From this story, the Aztecs drew a stark lesson: the universe demanded sacrifice. Without it, the sun would stall in the heavens, crops would fail, and the people would perish. Every ceremony in Tenochtitlán pulsed with this truth. To the Aztec heart, human sacrifice was not cruelty but repayment, a sacred debt owed to the gods who had shed their essence to create the world. The warriors of the empire carried this belief onto the battlefield, risking their lives to capture enemies who would feed the sun with their hearts. For the priests, clad in jaguar skins and blackened with ash, the rituals were not mere acts of death but the maintenance of cosmic balance. For the common people gathered at the foot of the temple, watching the warriors march in with their captives, there was no doubt, without blood, dawn itself might not come. Yet all was mixed with fear. The temple steps bore dark stains from countless ceremonies before, and the cries of previous sacrifices still lingered in the collective memory. Parents held their children close, whispering prayers that the gods might be satisfied, while young warriors gazed upward with ambition, yearning for the day they too would take captives and prove their devotion. The air was charged with tension, an intoxicating blend of dread and reverence. Even those who trembled at the coming sight could not look away, for this was the essence of being Aztec: to witness, to understand, and to accept that life's greatest honor lay in giving it away. The empire's grandeur amplified the drama of the ritual. Floating gardens stretched across the lake's surface, glimmering in the morning sun. Canals cut through the city like shimmering veins, carrying traders, priests, and nobles to the ceremonial heart. Tenochtitlán was a world of precision and beauty, yet at its center stood a pyramid that demanded blood. That contrast defined the Aztec experience, an empire both fertile and fierce, whose prosperity was bound to an unending cycle of death and renewal. As the drums pounded faster, the line of captured warriors appeared, bound yet adorned with feathers and paint, transformed into living images of the gods. The crowd roared, some in veneration, others in terror. To the Aztec eye, these captives were not simply men awaiting death, but vessels through which divine energy would be released. Above them stood the priests, their obsidian blades gleaming in the light, prepared to open the gates between the human and the divine. For those standing in the plaza, the meaning was unmistakable. What was about to unfold was no mere punishment of enemies, no grim entertainment. It was the reenactment of creation itself, a drama that kept the sun blazing and the rains falling. The ceremony was both theater and theology, a reminder that every heartbeat in Tenochtitlán was borrowed from the gods. The tension in the air carried a single, unspoken truth: if the sacrifices ceased, so too would the world. The drums fell silent for a breath, and in that pause hung the weight of the universe. Every gaze turned upward toward the temple, waiting for the blade to fall, for the sun to be fed once more. The Aztecs lived in that fragile balance between glory and dread, certain that blood alone could hold back the end of days. It was this belief, this unbreakable faith, that would send them into battle time and time again, driven not merely by conquest but by the eternal promise that in giving life, they preserved creation itself. The clash of steel on obsidian echoed across the battlefield, but here, victory was measured not in the bodies that fell but in the captives seized. The Aztec warriors surged forward in disciplined formations, their feathered banners rippling in the wind, each man eager to prove his valor. These were no ordinary wars. Known as the Xochiatl, or Flowery Wars, they were fought not for territory, treasure, or even conquest, but to bring back living bodies destined for the altars of Tenochtitlan. To the Aztecs, the act of capturing an enemy was the highest form of martial skill, far greater than killing outright. A dead foe could no longer serve the gods, but a living captive was a beating heart waiting to be offered to the sun. The Flowery Wars had a strange rhythm to them, unlike the brutal massacres that defined other forms of ancient warfare. Warriors armed with obsidian-bladed macuhuatl and decorated shields clashed with rivals, yet many strikes were measured, intended to disable rather than to slaughter. A warrior who captured 4 prisoners rose in rank and could achieve the coveted title of Eagle or Jaguar Knight, symbols of ferocity and elite honor. For young men, to return from battle empty-handed was a mark of shame, but to march home with captives was proof of courage and devotion. This relentless pursuit of living offerings shaped every strategy, every movement on the battlefield. These wars were as much political theater as religious necessity. Neighboring states such as Tlaxcala, Huexotzinco, and Cholula often found themselves locked in recurring conflicts with the Aztecs, knowing that these wars were never meant to end with decisive conquest. Instead, they were recurring performances, orchestrated engagements where both sides provided victims for sacrifice. Yet beneath the ritualistic facade lurked deep resentment. For the smaller states, every war drained their strength and filled Aztec temples with their sons and brothers. Over time, humiliation festered, and what began as ritual cooperation hardened into bitter rivalry. Still, within the Aztec Empire, these captives were more than tokens of war, they were symbols of power. To the rulers of Tenochtitlan, staging sacrifices of enemy nobles or warriors before vast crowds reinforced the empire's dominance. When thousands gathered to watch the ritual, the sight of foreign warriors laid upon the sacrificial stone was a declaration that the gods favored the Mexica people above all others. The ceremony was not just spiritual, but psychological warfare, breaking the will of opponents before blades were ever drawn again. For the captives themselves, the journey from battlefield to temple was a descent into inevitability. Some faced their fate with defiance, shouting the names of their cities as they were bound, hoping to carry their honor into death. Others trembled in silence, caught between fear and resignation. Yet even they understood the grim logic behind their capture. They were not slain in the mud like animals but taken for a purpose that reached beyond human affairs. In Aztec eyes, their lives had been elevated into offerings, transformed into something both sacred and terrifying. As the warriors returned from these battles, their captives in tow, the city swelled with anticipation. Each victory brought not just political reassurance but divine nourishment. Parents told their children that the sun rose because of such sacrifices, that without the bravery of warriors capturing enemies, the sky itself would darken. The Flowery Wars thus ensured the continuation of both empire and cosmos. But beneath the ceremonial grandeur lingered a fragile truth. Every captive was a reminder that the system was built upon fear and endless conflict. The same rituals that bound the empire together also sowed hatred that would one day turn against it. When the dust of the battlefield settled, and the songs of triumph rose from the victorious, there was no doubt of the outcome. The captives, shackled and adorned, began their march back to Tenochtitlan. The warriors walked beside them, proud and resolute, knowing they had fulfilled both duty and destiny. The people awaited them at the city gates, eager to see the chosen victims paraded through the streets, the living proof that the gods had been fed for yet another cycle. The Flowery Wars, strange and brutal as they were, became the lifeblood of an empire that demanded offerings without end. The captives were led through the heart of Tenochtitlan, their steps echoing against the stone streets as crowds gathered to watch. The city was alive with sound and color, canoes gliding through the canals, vendors calling out from their stalls, and banners fluttering in the breeze. Yet all eyes were fixed on the bound warriors, decorated with feathers, painted in vibrant hues, and transformed into living embodiments of the gods. For the people watching, this procession was not merely a march of prisoners but a sacred journey, a reminder that the captives were no longer men of flesh and blood alone but vessels carrying divine energy toward its final release. As the line wound toward the Templo Mayor, the towering pyramid rose above the city like a mountain of stone, its steps steep and stained from countless offerings before. At the top, the twin shrines of Huitzilopochtli, god of war and the sun, and Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility, waited like open mouths demanding to be fed. The temple itself was a symbol of cosmic balance, a place where the elements of war and life intertwined, and the sacrifices made upon its summit kept the cycles of nature turning. Each step the captives took was heavy with this knowledge, each movement a step closer to eternity. The rituals began long before the blade ever touched flesh. The captives were often treated with an eerie kind of reverence, bathed and dressed as divine impersonators. They were adorned with costumes, their faces painted to resemble the gods they were chosen to embody. Songs were sung in their honor, drums beat in rhythm to their steps, and priests recited prayers that carried through the crowds like a steady chant. To outsiders, it might have seemed cruel mockery, but within Aztec belief, it was elevation. These men were not being humiliated but honored, chosen to play a role in the drama of creation itself. The warriors who had captured them walked with pride, their deeds celebrated by their families and their city. For them, bringing a living offering to the temple was the fulfillment of duty and the path to glory. The chants of the people reinforced the idea that they had not only won a battle but preserved the very movement of the heavens. For the common onlooker, it was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, to see enemies paraded with dignity, knowing they would soon give their lives to keep the sun rising and the rains falling. The contradiction was sharp, yet within Aztec culture, it was perfectly reconciled. As the captives ascended the steep staircase of the Templo Mayor, the scale of the structure became overwhelming. The climb was long, and with each step, the murmurs of the crowd grew quieter, replaced by the steady pounding of drums and the rising chant of priests. The air thickened with incense, sweet and choking, and the cries of exotic birds mingled with the low roar of anticipation. From above, the city stretched endlessly, its causeways cutting across the shimmering lake, but for the captives, the world narrowed to the path before them, the final ascent to the stone where countless others had fallen. Some went willingly, accepting their fate as part of a divine cycle, holding their heads high in defiance or faith. Others faltered, trembling as the weight of inevitability pressed down on them, the cheers of the crowd both uplifting and suffocating. For the priests waiting at the top, however, there was no hesitation. Their roles were clear, their duty sacred. The temple steps were not simply the climb to death, they were the passage into myth, the threshold where mortal life ended and the gods' hunger was answered. Every drumbeat, every breath of incense, every step taken up the pyramid brought the city closer to the moment that bound their world together. At the summit of the Templo Mayor, the moment of dread and awe arrived. The captives, painted and adorned as divine embodiments, were laid upon the cold sacrificial stone, their bodies stretched by strong hands so that their chests were bared to the sky. The drums beat in unison, each strike a thunderclap rolling through the city, drowning out the cries of fear or defiance. The crowd below held its breath, thousands of eyes fixed upon the platform where mortals met gods. For the Aztecs, what unfolded was not a killing but a cosmic offering, a reenactment of the creation myth, the very act that ensured the sun would rise again tomorrow. The priests moved with precision, their obsidian blades gleaming in the sunlight, sharp enough to cut flesh and bone with terrifying ease. With a swift motion, a chest was opened, the blade sliding through skin and muscle until the heart, still pounding with life, was lifted high above the heads of the assembly. The people roared, their voices carrying across the city and echoing out across the waters of the lake. To them, the sight of the heart, crimson and glistening in the morning sun, was the most sacred reassurance. The gods had been fed, the world preserved for another cycle. The heart was placed into a vessel, its blood dripping down the steps, painting the stone red as it had been countless times before. The ritual did not end with one sacrifice. Another captive was brought forward, then another, each treated with the same solemnity, the same divine choreography. The captives, whether resisting or accepting, became part of a sequence that blurred the line between terror and transcendence. Their screams, prayers, or silence mingled with the chants of the priests, the rhythm of the drums, and the gasps of the crowd. Each life given was another strand added to the web that bound earth to the heavens. For the Aztecs, it was not death alone but transformation, the release of vital energy back to the gods who had given it first. From the plaza below, The scene appeared both magnificent and horrifying. Children clutched their mothers as the blood flowed down the steps, while warriors stood tall, their chests swelling with pride, knowing that their captured enemies had secured the survival of the cosmos. To refuse to watch was unthinkable, for to witness the ceremony was itself a civic duty, a reminder of the fragile balance between existence and chaos. Each spectator carried home the memory of the spectacle, a mixture of pride, fear, and reverence that reinforced loyalty to the empire and faith in the gods. When the last heart was offered and the drums slowed, silence descended over the city like a shroud. The smoke of incense curled upward into the sky, carrying with it the essence of the offerings. For a moment, the people believed they could feel the gods' presence, a quiet acknowledgement from the heavens that their sacrifice had been accepted. The captives lay still, their blood soaking the stone, their spirits believed to be soaring upward to accompany the sun on its eternal journey. In that silence, the Aztecs knew their duty had been fulfilled, and for one more day, the world was safe. The echoes of the ceremony did not fade when the drums grew silent. Instead, they rippled outward across the Valley of Mexico, leaving both awe and dread in their wake. For the Aztecs, the sacrifices at the Templo Mayor confirmed their strength and devotion, but for their neighbors, the sight of captives paraded through the streets and slaughtered upon the altar was a reminder of their own vulnerability. Each flowery war raid, each procession of prisoners, deepened the resentment of those who were forced to provide lives for the empire's rituals. Beneath the surface of ritualized cooperation, bitterness began to smolder. The small estates that surrounded Tenochtitlán, once bound by shared customs, now saw the ceremonies less as sacred duty and more as humiliation. Fathers and mothers mourned their children taken to fuel the Aztec sun. Warriors who should have returned in triumph to their homelands instead became living offerings on the enemy's pyramid. The grandeur of the rituals projected Aztec dominance, but it also created enemies who could never forgive. Even among those who participated in the system, resentment grew with every cycle of blood. This fear and hatred became fertile ground for rebellion. The Tlaxcalans, long harassed by Aztec raiding parties, nursed a deep desire for revenge. Other cities whispered of resistance, but few dared to act openly, for the power of Tenochtitlan was overwhelming. Still, the constant demand for captives drained their strength and fostered unrest. The very system meant to demonstrate Aztec supremacy was also undermining the stability of their world, creating cracks in the foundation of the empire. When foreign sails appeared on the horizon, the resentment of these neighbors became the most dangerous weapon against the Aztecs themselves. To the Spaniards who marched inland under Hernán Cortés, the rituals they witnessed seemed monstrous, a symbol of savagery to be eradicated. But to the enemies of Tenochtitlan, the arrival of the strangers offered an opportunity to finally break the cycle. The horror of sacrifice became a rallying cry, a reason to join forces with outsiders who promised an end to Aztec dominance. The Spanish did not conquer alone, they were carried forward by the hatred that sacrifice had sown. What had once been the strength of the empire turned against it. The ceremonies that kept the Aztec cosmos alive became the very image that fueled rebellion and foreign invasion. Blood had preserved the sun, but it had also drenched the empire in fear and hostility. Even as the drums of the Templo Mayor beat with pride, their sound echoed with the warning of downfall. The gods might have been appeased, but the enemies of the Aztecs had not, and soon the rituals that defined the empire would become one of the reasons for its collapse. The fall of Tenochtitlan came swiftly, yet its echoes lingered across centuries. When the Spanish and their native allies stormed the city in 1521, the once mighty Aztec Empire crumbled under siege, famine, and disease. The great Templo Mayor, where thousands had witnessed the heart of ritual sacrifice, was torn down, its stones repurposed to build churches in the image of a new faith. To the conquerors, the ceremonies they had seen were proof of barbarity, evidence that their mission was righteous. Yet to the Aztecs, the destruction was not only the loss of their capital but the unraveling of the cosmic order itself. The rituals that had preserved the sun and rains were silenced, and with them, an entire worldview collapsed. Spanish chroniclers painted the Aztecs in tones of horror, emphasizing the rivers of blood, the obsidian blades, and the countless victims. To European audiences, these accounts confirmed a vision of a savage people, and the memory of sacrifice became the defining image of the Aztec world. Yet such portrayals often stripped away the deeper meaning of the rituals, ignoring that the Aztecs saw themselves as debtors to the gods, bound to repay with life what life had first been given. To judge the ceremonies only as cruelty is to miss the central truth of a civilization that believed existence itself hung upon the knife. Still, the legacy of those rituals is not easily reconciled. They inspire fascination and revulsion in equal measure. To modern eyes, the thought of human sacrifice is almost unimaginable, yet to the Aztecs, it was a necessity as real as planting crops or defending their homes. The blood spilled upon the Templo Mayor was not waste, but nourishment for a universe that demanded constant renewal. The ceremonies were both the empire's greatest strength and its fatal weakness, binding its people in unity while alienating its neighbors and inviting destruction. What remains is the haunting paradox of the Aztec story. They built one of the most extraordinary cities of the ancient world, mastered agriculture, engineering, and art, yet their most enduring image is of captives offered to the sun. The rituals that once guaranteed the dawn also hastened their twilight, for no empire can endure when fear outweighs loyalty. Even so, their worldview challenges us to reflect on the lengths to which humanity will go in service of belief, and the sacrifices we deem necessary for survival. As the smoke of history clears, the question lingers like a shadow: did the Aztecs give their lives to save the world, or did their devotion to blood condemn their empire to its end? The answer lies somewhere in between, in that fragile space where faith, fear, and power intertwine. And though their temples lie in ruins, the memory of those ceremonies endures, a reminder that even the greatest civilizations can be undone by the very rituals that once held them together.